TVS has a rich history in Indian motorsport, and it's something that the company is especially proud of, and with good reason. It's been tasting success since the 1980s and continues to be a dominant force in the Indian racing scene even today. We've often seen learnings and technology from its race bikes trickle down to its road bikes. But this time around, it's going to be a road bike that's helping out the race team. You see, TVS races in the 165cc Pro Stock category at the Indian National Motorcycle Racing Championship. To comply with the rules of this class, it needs to use an appropriate engine from one of its road bikes, which in this case is the RTR 164V. Now, of course, this engine is heavily modified for race use, but one thing they can't change too much is cubic capacity. That leaves 5cc of displacement that TVS could use but is unable to because it doesn't have a 165cc road bike. So along comes the Apache RTR 165RP. TVS has built 200 of these bikes to allow it to homologate the engine for use in next year's national championships. It costs 1.45 lakh rupees, which is over 20,000 rupees more expensive than the costliest RTR 164V, and that's quite a lot. But that's all irrelevant because all 200 units are already sold out, which means it's impossible for most of us to find out just what this bike is like. But you can now do the next best thing and check out our review. The rules of this class allow for a maximum engine capacity of 165cc. And unsurprisingly, this bike's displacement figure is a neat 164.9cc. But this isn't some simple boring and stroking job from TVS. There have been significant changes made to the cylinder head, with larger valves and ports and different cam profiles. The piston is also different, not just in the sense that it's larger, but also in its shape. The end result is a peak power output of 19.2 horsepower, which is considerably higher than the RTR 164V's 17.5 horsepower. Torque, though, is slightly down, 14.2 Nm compared to 14.73 Nm. What's really telling, though, is the fact that the RP makes its peak figures a good deal higher up the rev range than the 164V. Despite this bike being a good deal more expensive, you don't get any riding modes like you do on the 164V. It's all the power, all the time. More power than even something like the R15V4 with its fancy VVA system and liquid cooling. And it feels it to an extent. The RP's motor is a hard-working little powerhouse with a nice meaty mid-range that builds into a strong top end. It's a fairly tractable engine and does a good job of carrying you around at low RPMs. But the real joy is in surfing the surge of power that arrives at 6000 RPM and carries you till a little past 9000 RPM. It makes for a very enjoyable and quick ride, all the more so because the RP's throttle response is nice and crisp without being too sharp or snatchy. In terms of actual acceleration figures, our tests show that the RP is exactly on par with the R15 up to 70 kph, after which the Yamaha edges ahead. The RTR 160's engine is known for legendary refinement levels, and this 165 motor is quite smooth in its own right, remaining largely vibration-free through most of the rev range. But once you cross 7000 RPM, you do have a buzz that creeps into the bars and foot pegs. Despite its racy intent, the RP hasn't sacrificed in the area of comfort. You still get excellent ride quality from the Showa suspension, and you're kept well isolated from our roads. The riding position is also unchanged, meaning that it's fairly upright and relaxed, but also a little cramped for your legs with a fairly small distance from seat to foot peg. So you will want to flex your knees and stretch your legs every now and then, especially if you're on the taller side. The handling story is quite similar to the RTR 160 as well, meaning that this is a rather nimble and agile motorcycle, and it feels sharp when slicing through fast-moving traffic. But when you start pushing hard in the twisties, in typical Apache fashion, it does feel edgy and reactive at high lean angles, so it will take a pair of experienced hands to get the most out of this chassis. Also, like the standard 164V, braking feel has room for improvement. Even though this bike managed to stop reasonably quickly in our performance tests, it did require a large handful of front brake, and a little more bite and feel at the lever would have been welcome on a bike that otherwise feels quite sharp. Despite that sharpness, the RP remains perfectly easy to ride on a regular basis, with no real adjustment required on your part. Like most motorcycles from TVS, it feels thoroughly engineered and non-compromised. If you are one of the lucky 200 that's bought one of these, you'll have no trouble letting the world know. Because while it may share its design with the RTR 164V, this RP gets a unique color and graphic scheme, and a rather loud one at that. The red, white and blue combo is one that's hard to go wrong with, and it's executed quite well on this bike, with a neat matte finish. Great to look at, but a little tricky to keep clean. What would have really sealed the deal though is if TVS had given these 200 bikes a special numbered badge to really drive home the uniqueness and exclusivity. The features department is probably this bike's biggest shortcoming, because despite its premium price, the RP misses out on Bluetooth connectivity, riding modes, a gear position indicator and glide-through technology, all of which are available on the cheaper RTR 164V. One way in which it's perhaps too similar to a race bike is in the fact that there's no side stand engine cutoff or indicator. What it does get is fully digital instrumentation, neat adjustable levers, a slipper clutch and an excellent LED headlight. With this bike completely sold out for the moment, there's little point telling you how its pros weigh up against its cons or whether it's worth its asking price. Although personally, I do think it is, purely because of how cool it is to own a rare bike like this that also offers significant performance gains. What this bike is a display of TVS's commitment to continuing to dominate the INMRC. I can't recall any Indian bike maker manufacturing a homologation special to aid its racing operation. But TVS has built a reputation for doing things a little differently, and it almost always works out excellently for manufacturer and buyer alike. So kudos to TVS for this bike. The fact that a few happy road users get to benefit from a fun new homologation special motorcycle without any compromises in how it rides is an absolute win-win.